Hello and welcome to another gameplay commentary video for GiantSlayerTV. Today I'll be watching a game from the perspective of Faye on patch 12.6. This game was played on the day of the patch and is in the Diamond Masters MMR bracket. As usual, our goal today is to highlight defining decisions of the game to help show where improvements can be made in a given game. For this game specifically, there are several key moments where Faye could have turned this game from a second place into a first. Even though top 2 is a great result, it is always worth taking a look back on the game, especially in the form of a VOD review. There are always ways to improve. That said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Let's begin by covering the opening carousel along with the game plan Faye had going into the game. Going into any new patch, it's important to keep in mind any major balance changes, but it's also a good idea to watch streams when possible. TFT has a plethora of high-level streamers that play the game regularly, which gives other players a fantastic source of information. Keep in mind, regional metas differ, but it's still worthwhile to watch a streamer at the beginning of a patch to get an idea of what's being played. In the case of 12.6, Faye knew from the patch notes that a lot of compositions got nerfed, but Warwick was mostly untouched. That assessment was corroborated by multiple high-level players spamming Warwick after the patch. Looks like we might be in for a bit of a war week. With that knowledge, the game plan for Faye, particularly at the start of the patch, is to aim for Warwick if possible. That means opening with a bow or glove is ideal since they both build into essential Warwick items. Other priorities include Chain Vest for defensive item openers or Titan's Resolve, and Belt for defensive item openers or Morellonomicon. These are all on the radar for Faye, but we do see she's able to easily snag the bow. Let's now move on to the first major decision of the game, the 1-4 Augment. Augments provide easy breakpoints in a game to look back on, so keep that in mind when reviewing your own games. The 3 options for Faye are all quite good for silver augments, so it mainly comes down to playstyle. In general, Faye favors econ openers when possible, so naturally, this means Treasure Trove is higher up in priority. Battle Mage can be alright, but at tier 1, it's unlikely to make a huge difference in early game fights, and while Phony Frontline is an amazing augment, it doesn't outweigh the appeal of more early game gold for Faye. At the end of the day, there's no wrong choice between these augments. That said, it's worth keeping in mind that taking an econ augment on 1-4 means you will, depending on the lobby, have a slightly weaker board throughout stage 2 and early into stage 3. The next moment in the game isn't necessarily a major decision, but it is game defining. Being last pick means Faye has a lack of options to pick from on the carousel, and in the case of trying to play Warwick, that can be quite detrimental. We see the best component, a bow, is taken before Faye can get to it, which leaves either a Chain Vest or Spatula. She opts to take the Spatula as this can be useful for a lot of compositions, but it is one less component to potentially give Warwick. This type of decision can influence your game later on, so always take note of it because in this case, Faye, having less components does end up coming back to haunt her. It's also a great highlight advocating for a long streak if you're aiming to play any composition relying on specific items, as picking last on the carousel rarely works out in your favor. Not much happens between the 2-4 carousel and the next pivotal moment, the 3-3 Augment. The only major milestone for Faye was hitting Warwick 2, but it's not too important since it happened right after the carousel. What is important is, of course, the augment choice. At this point in the game, even though the game plan is Warwick, Faye has a few potential transitions lined up. Having a Spatula means she can aim for a mutant transition, as the mutation this game is Synaptic Web, or perhaps Debonair with the Chain Vest and look to play VIP Draven. Since she doesn't have great Warwick items, it's hard to commit to him at this moment. That means an augment like Challenger Heart is not ideal since it locks her into a few compositions. Had it been an emblem, then maybe, but a heart augment is less flexible. Knife's Edge is always good for frontline boards with melee carries, but Faye is considering pivoting into a backline carry, so Knife's Edge wouldn't get any value. That means the only viable choice here is Ascension. Ascension pairs well with a lot of boards, so it's not a risk to take. In fact, it's the safe play out of these 3 options. Slightly different components, or had the Challenger augment been an emblem instead of a heart, then Faye may have made a different choice. As is, Ascension is decent and doesn't influence her future composition one way or another. The next carousel comes around and Faye manages to lose enough health to be 3rd pick instead of last. Unfortunately, it is a 3 Spatula carousel, which limits the amount of components available. Ideally, Faye wants a glove, but being 3rd pick makes it unlikely. So the consideration here is whether or not a Tactician's Crown is worth it. In most games, the answer is yes. For For this game specifically, it may end up limiting what Faye can transition into, as using her early spatula removes a lot of options. But at the end of the day, Tactician's Crown is the best all-around option, so spatula it is. Just keep in mind that these seemingly minor decisions build up on each other over time, as we're beginning to see for Faye in regards to her available components. Really quickly, before we move into another crucial moment, Faye finally decides to commit to re-rolling Warwick. This decision is made after scouting and seeing it's mostly uncontested. This is the best time to make the decision because she has enough gold to begin leveling to 7 on 4-1, or she can re-roll. Always try to maximize time during PvE rounds, whether that's scouting or making some decisions or rolling to save time the next round. Stage 4 goes by without too many hiccups for Faye or major decisions. Rerolling is a simple playstyle to follow through with, and that's the case here for Faye, as we do see that she managed to hit Warwick 3. That said, she still lacks good items for him, which is where the 4-6 augment comes into play. It's prismatic augments to round out this game, and oh boy does Faye have a tough decision to make. Considering her current dismal state of items on Warwick, item grab bag is mighty tempting. 2 fully completed items with a Reforger gives her a decent chance at finding something useful for Warwick. On the other side, cybernetic implants gives her whole board more value, especially on her secondary damage dealer Tryndamere. Warwick is often the star of the show when rerolled, but having other champions capable of dealing damage is always a consideration to be made with your augment choice. Dynamite 3 even has merit here with Renata and the scaling it provides on Warwick. In the end, the choice is cybernetic implants because it does bring the most value to Faye's board without the risk of not getting useful items from item grab bag. We're curious to know what you would have chosen for such an important stage of augment, so let us know in the comment section below after the video is done. Briefly, let's talk about what to do after hitting Warwick 3. Either you can keep leveling, as we see Faye begin to do, or you can roll for upgrades to things like Tryndamere 3. In this case, we see Faye is on a 2-win streak with 67 health, so there's no rush for her to roll a lot of gold at level 8, as leveling to 9 is likely to give her board more value later on. But she instead levels and rolls with the intent to potentially find 5 costs like Tahm Kench and Victor. This decision ends up severely limiting her economy and does play a role in only placing second at the end of the game. Next, Carousel rolls around, and once again, Faye is last pick with dismal options to give her Warwick. She goes with the Assassin emblem, but keep in mind Warwick does not have any CC immunity either from augments or items. While turning him into Assassin helps with backline access, it does leave him at the mercy of CC, so it's always something to keep in mind when turning any melee carry into an Assassin. This is another minor moment that once again is piled onto several others that lead to Faye not winning this game. Finally, the last major decision in the game is when we're down to the top 2. Faye, at 27 health and 50 gold, is guaranteed to survive to make it to the next PvE round. This means she's in a good position to save gold, level to 9 on 7-1, and potentially hit major 5-cost upgrades. The other option, which is what Faye opts for, is rolling. Rolling is not the wrong choice, but the only real upgrade she's looking to hit is Tryndamere 3, as 2-starring 5-cost units level 8 is difficult to do. Plus, she may high roll Nico's help during the PvE round, which would naturally give her Tryndamere 3. Ultimately, the decision to roll doesn't provide enough boost in power for Faye to win the next round. That means going into the next combat round on 7-1, she's in a dire situation without a good amount of luck on her side. It all comes down to positioning and a bit of RNG as to whether or not her Warwick gets CC'd into oblivion. Deciding to roll wasn't the wrong decision to make, but wasn't necessary to do at this point of the game since Faye was guaranteed to survive. Even though it's tempting to rush to the end of the game, always try to keep in mind important upcoming rounds like PvE, where you can reassess the situation to make a more informed decision. The last fight of the game is upon us, and whoops, Faye has made a positional error and misplaced her Zephyr. This moment does highlight why decisions during PvE rounds are helpful, because Faye ended up spending most of her time rolling pre-combat to find upgrades and ran out of time to properly position. Scrambling to move units to the correct position or putting an item on the wrong unit are all fixable, so don't sweat those types of mistakes too often. That said, scouting and positioning should always be the top priority in the late game. Sometimes it won't make much of a difference if the player's board is much stronger, but good positioning can always turn the tide of a fight when both boards are close in strength. All in all, the amount of key decisions in this game are interesting to take note of. What if Faye had opted for a loss streak to get Warwick items instead of going on an early win streak? Or not taking the spatula for Tactician's Crown? Even committing to Warwick is a decision worth questioning, as we saw throughout the game she consistently lacked in items to give to Warwick. The two decisions that impacted the result of the game were seemingly minor compared to the larger moments like the augment rounds or the lack of Warwick items. The two decisions we're talking about were rolling on 5-1 when it was unnecessary to do so, and again on 6-6 when she was guaranteed to survive to the PvE round. With extra gold, Faye had the opportunity to level to 9 and then roll at opportune times to hit important upgrades. Of course, variance comes into play and she may not have hit those upgrades, but given her health and potential economy, getting an upgraded Silco, Victor, and one more unit was definitely doable. Overall, it's easy to look back on a game and nitpick every decision. What's important is being decisive in the moment. If it ends up being the wrong choice, that's fine. Mistakes are normal and are there for us to learn from, as we saw in this game. That's it for today's video, folks, but let us know in the comment section below what you'd like to see in our next gameplay commentary video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Here's your Giant Slayer TFT videos.